Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today I am in Panther Creek State Park, which is in Morristown, Tennessee. And I'm on a trail that I used to go on all the time called the Point Overlook Trail. So 14 years ago, this month, 14 years ago, I actually moved to Jefferson City, Tennessee. I had all my possessions in the back of my friend's pickup truck, which I borrowed, and I drove them across here. Of course, had to drive the truck back and then come back in my own vehicle. But spent the first week of my time here at Panther Creek State Park, staying in one of the trailers that camper trailers that one of the members here owned, and then I found a place. But for the entire time that I lived in Jefferson City, Tennessee, a couple years preaching with a church there, this was my state park. This was the place that I used to go all the time. And you know, it's crazy that when you go back on a trail that you've been on 100 times or however many times I went on there, it's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but maybe not too much of one. Just how you remember the curves and you remember the various points, and just really a pretty cool experience to come back after all these years and have a look around. But now we're going to be having a look together at a psalm, and let's go ahead and read that now. Psalm 97 for today. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the many coastlands be glad. Clouds and thick darkness are all around him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him and burns up his adversaries all around. His lightnings light up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. The heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the peoples see his glory. All worshippers of images are put to shame, who make their boast in worthless idols. Worship him, all you gods. Zion hears and is glad, and the daughters of Judah rejoice, because of your judgments, O Lord. For you, O Lord, are most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. O you who love the Lord, hate evil. He preserves the lives of his saints. He delivers them from the hand of the wicked. Light is sown for the righteous, and joy for the upright in heart. Rejoice in the Lord, O you righteous, and give thanks to his holy name. When I first read this psalm in preparation for today's recording, I actually thought of Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 29. You know, our God is a consuming fire. When we think about God and we think about the reasons that we pursue God or that we come to God, that aspect of his nature isn't always, high up on our list. We think about the love of God, the mercy of God, the righteousness, goodness of God, and all of those positive attributes. But then our God is a consuming fire. When the Hebrews author talked about that nature of God in that particular passage, he was reminding us of the fact that we have come to this wonderful spiritual entity, the kingdom, verse 28, of God. But then it talked about how we needed to obviously observe and be in reverence of the fact that our God is a consuming fire. And so there's this aspect of fear that comes into the picture. When you're reading that in verses 3 through 5, fire goes before him, lightnings light up the world, the mountains are melting like wax. You can't help but think about that aspect of God, his all-conquering, all-powerful nature. And there's certainly a part of that could be very terrifying to reflect upon. But it's interesting that reflection comes after two very different reflections in the first couple of verses. In verse 1, this attribute of God, the fact that he is a fire, isn't at all troubling the psalmist. Instead, he says, the Lord reigns, let all the earth rejoice, let the coastlands be glad. And so there's rejoicing and gladness that come before this thought of him as a consuming fire. And then in verse 2, the idea of righteousness and justice, the reason for this rejoicing, and the fire aspect of God, the fact that he is all-conquering, all-consuming, and that nothing stands before him, finds no place of fear, or those things produce no fear in the heart of the psalmist, because he realizes what that fire is all about. It was interesting coming back to this trail and seeing, for one reason or another, there's a lot of trees that have fallen. I don't know if that's termite damage or if that's a storm that came through here in the time between when I was here last and now. But forests experience this all the time. They experience destructive forces, be it wind in Alaska. This summer we've had a lot of fires, and so a lot of fire damage in the forests in Alaska. Fire sweeps through, the forces of nature sweep through with destruction and with seeming, a lack of prejudice. They just destroy everything. God's not like that. When we think about him as a consuming fire, he does not exist to consume. He does not exist to destroy or to defeat. His fire rolls forth in faithfulness, in righteousness, in justice. And so when the psalmist reflects upon the fact that God is a consuming fire, he doesn't find that to be a cause for fear on his part. And so in verse 6, he talks about how, the heavens proclaim his righteousness, the people see his glory, the glory of a consuming fire. And there are these two responses that he then describes. There's, of course, the response of shame, the response of not having a reason to stand before a righteous fire because you're not righteous yourself or not even attempting to be righteous yourself. And so the worshipers of images, they're put to shame, the ones who have turned their lives and their paths over to things that are obviously not valuable and that are totally incapable of helping them or saving them. And so he says, you guys need to change your hearts and your ways, worship him, all you gods, you creators of gods and you false gods out there. But then their shame is put in direct contrast with the gladness, the joy that comes to Israel and the city of Zion. God's people have no reason to be afraid because of God as a consuming fire. And again, verse 1, remember, this is an attribute of God that promotes praise and promotes joy, gladness. And so as you're reflecting upon this and you're thinking about God as a consuming fire, verse 10 is the sort of the call to action. You love the Lord, hate evil. You want to be prepared for this aspect of the nature of God. It's not a reason to be afraid, but hate evil. And expect as you do so, expect as you honor the fact that God is a consuming fire, expect as you do so to experience preservation, he says in verse 10, light. Fire can be very destructive, but we're very thankful to be here under a big ball of fire, the sun, right? The sun gives heat and warmth and light to this earth. And so, yes, the sun is a consuming fire, but think about all the positive nature that comes from that fire. And then verse 12, rejoicing and reason for thankfulness and gratitude come when a person hates evil. So, you reflect upon the fact that Hebrews 12:29 is true, that our God is a consuming fire, but if fear is the only response that you have to that, maybe you need to rethink that attribute of God or that aspect of God. Nothing can stand before God, but there are things that can stand with God, and there are people who can be prepared to meet that aspect of the nature of God. So God bless us and help us to have the wisdom to prepare ourselves to be like him and therefore to have no reason to fear when he comes as a conquering fire. May God bless you today.